Hey guys, welcome to another Bitter Butter Render Blender tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll give you an overview on all the important stages I had to go through to get this awesome render. Make sure to watch till the end because I'll be going through many tips and tricks that will help you a lot in your own VFX projects. So let's get started. Okay, so one of the things you absolutely have to do before starting is convert all your footage into an image sequence. Now I learned this the hard way because once when I was rendering out a really long scene, I rendered it out to be a video. But after a lot of time, when it was close to the end, Blender decided to crash. And since it was rendered out to be a video file, the file got corrupted. But if the render was rendered out as an image sequence, if Blender crashed, all I would have had to do was start off from the frame Blender crashed. So now, to make a video into an image sequence in Blender, all you have to do is click on the plus on the top corner in a new Blender project, then click video editing, then video editing in that section. Then you can click on Add, Movie, and locate your video file. Then you can see that on the footage there's a number which indicates the amount of frames. So change Blender's frame amount to the number on the clip. Now go to the render output and match the frame rate of the footage. Then scroll down and choose a render output file and finally make sure to render as a PNG. Then hit render and wait a few seconds and there you go, you've gotten your image sequence. Okay, now the fun part starts, motion tracking. First I click on the plus and go into the VFX tab and click motion tracking. Then import your footage. The reason I chose this footage is because it has a lot of distinctive points to track on the floor and also on the walls, so it gives Blender a little bit of parallax. Then I'll do the normal stuff while motion tracking. I would choose the desired settings and set up the tracking markers. Then I'll track my footage. Then I would solve my camera motion and then I would clean up my tracks just to get a better solved error. Then I would set up my tracking scene. And at last I would set up the floor by choosing 3 tracking markers that make it 90 degrees on the floor. Now if you want to know how to motion track in Blender in detail, I have a tutorial that will show you how to motion track in Blender. And by the way, one thing you have to make sure to do is on the bottom, make sure to click set video as background or else it will mess up your scene. Okay, now before we continue, make sure to change the render engine to cycles and make sure the samples are around 50. Now obviously if you find 50 samples isn't enough, you can go higher, but 50 is the standard I go for. Then search for film and check transparent or else the renders won't work. Okay, now we need to build out our geometry and apply the video as a texture to it. Here's how. The reason we're doing this is because the lighting needs to look realistic. So to do that, I would delete up my tracking scene first and add a new plane. Now since the plane is matched with the floor already, I wouldn't have to do many steps. First, I would do the usual and extrude edges and move faces around and really just match my geometry with the one in the video. Now I don't have to do this to the whole scene, just the parts that will be near or touching my subject. Okay, now for the texture, all we're going to be doing is applying the video as a texture. Now listen closely because this part is really important and if you UV and wrap it wrong, it will throw your whole scene off. Okay, so first of all, add a texture to the geometry. Then in the material properties, click on the base color button and change it to image texture. From there on, you can click on open and open all the images in the image sequence that we just created. Then you can choose cyclic and auto refresh. And now you can open up the tab and change the vector. Now the textures will be projected from our view just like this. Now what we need to do is just build out our subject. In this case, I went with an asset from Polyhaven, but if you want my assets and base video, they will all be free and in the descriptions below. Now, one thing before we continue we have to do is make sure to click on your geometry that we created previously and make sure to change that as a shadow catcher. To do that, we can search up mask while clicking on the geometry that we created and click shadow catcher. Okay, now all we need to do is really just animate our subject or our scene. Okay, now I will be going through the after effects that we need to do to get the most realism, but just for a bonus, I'll be showing you how to break up your objects like I did here. So now if you want to break your objects just like I did, firstly, you need to enable a add-on. So to do that, we can go into the edit over here, preferences, add-on, and search up cell fracture. This add-on is already built into Blender. Now all we need to do is click on our subject that we need to break and click function and F3 for Windows. Or if you're on a Mac, it would be Option and F3. And then search up cell fracture and click on it. Then you'll see a new tab opens. Now this is where you choose how your object breaks into pieces. So just for an overview, the source limit is how much the pieces break into. Then the noise is how uniform or random your pieces' shapes are once they are broken. So a value of 0 means all the pieces will be identically cut out, or a value of 1 means all the pieces will be randomly cut out. Now I prefer you go with the value of 1 for the most realism. Now everything else you can leave out except for recursion. Now recursion is how many times the already cut pieces are being cut again. Now I advise you to mess around with the settings and find out what fits best for you. But if you want my settings, here they are. Okay, so once you've gotten your settings, all you now need to do is click OK. And then all we need to do is wait until Blender breaks up your pieces. Okay, now we have to simulate the physics. So firstly, delete your original shape that will be inside the broken up version of your shape. Then select all your pieces that are broken up and click on this tab. And on this tab, click on individual origins. Then scale until the pieces aren't touching each other. Now the reason we're doing this is because otherwise the pieces will fly everywhere. Then shift click on one of the pieces and go into the physics properties tab. From there on you can choose your rigid bodies. Then choose these settings for the best result. Now obviously you can choose your own settings, but these are the settings I prefer for this scene. But one of the things you have to make sure to do is that make the collision margin 0.001 meters so your pieces don't go haywire. Now choose all your broken pieces, then holding shift click on the piece that you just applied your rigid bodies to, like this. Now click on object, rigid body and copy from active. And lastly, make your floor and collision object. To do that, we're going to do the same thing by adding a rigid body, except we're going to make it passive and we're going to make the shape mesh. Now we are 99% of the way through. This part that I will be showing you is kind of like a cherry on top. So we need to composite and color match our render. Now I did all of these stuff in After Effects, but you can do it in Blender as well. And I'll be showing you how to do it in Blender. So the reason we need to color match is because the camera in the video and the camera in Blender are not the same, meaning the color space and the other color related stuff are different. To make the renders look realistic, we first need to head into the compositing tab and click use nodes. Then render out any single frame in your scene. Then delete all your nodes except for the composite node. Let's start from scratch. So firstly, I advise you to enable the Node Wrangler add-on using the method referred above to enable the cell fracture add-on. Now we are going to add a node called render layers. Then plug the image into image. Then add a viewer node and plug the render layer image into the viewer image input as well. Now if you don't see anything such as this, make sure this is in foreground and render the frame again. Now you should be able to see your render. Now open up a movie clip. The image sequence should be open in the node. If it isn't, open it up there. Now add a alpha over node to overlay each footage. Now plug in the movie clip on the top and the render layer to the bottom. Now we can start color matching. So the concept is to separate the RGB values of the whole footage, then change the colors on the render to match its black and white values to the one of the footage. Here's what I mean. Okay, firstly add a separate RGB node after the alpha over node and before the viewer node. Make sure the R is plugged into the viewer node. Now add a RGB curves node in between the render layer and the alpha over node. Now plug and then change the RGB curve into red. Now change the red values until the darkest value on the render matches the darkest value of the video, and change the red values until the lightest value of the render matches with the lightest value of the video on the RGB curves. Now on the separate RGB value, change it to green and change the RGB curves to green as well, and do the same thing. Then do the same thing to blue as well. Finally, you can delete the separate RGB value and plug in the alpha over to the output into the viewer and the composite image input. Now, if you want me to make a video about RGB curves, make sure to comment down below. Now choose your render output, and just like I said before, make sure to render your video out in a PNG sequence just to be safe. And then finally make it into a video format like explained before. Now, just one thing you have to make sure is when you're rendering in a PNG sequence, especially during VFX, make sure it is in RGBA format, so it has a red, green, blue, but also a alpha channel, meaning it has an invisible background. Okay, that was it for this VFX tutorial. Hope you learned a lot, and make sure to subscribe, hit that like button and the notification button, and I'll see you in the next one.